alone is not a feasible approach in the foreseeable future. And with rising community expectations, speed management has a critical role to play in improving road safety outcomes in rural environments. This session will explore practical and evidence-based approaches across Australia and New Zealand that give state and local organisations the tools they need to make meaningful safety improvements on their networks. So I'd first like to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. Our first presenter is Paul Durden, who will be presenting on rural speed management. Paul is a Technical Director of Road Safety at ABLI and is a trusted advisor to transport authorities in New Zealand and Australia on road safety matters. He is an expert in road safety strategy development, speed management, and network safety planning. Our second speaker is Chris Blackmore, who will be presenting on data-driven planning approaches. So Chris is a Principal Transportation Planner at ABLI and is involved in a wide range of transport planning projects across Australia and New Zealand, with a specific focus on transportation modelling, economics, and data analysis. And last, but certainly not least, we have Kath Jacobs, who will be presenting on strategic communication and engagement in rural areas. Kath is an Associate Director of Consultation and Engagement at ABLI and is responsible for managing ABLI's comms and engagement portfolio, working collaboratively with ABLI's technical team and clients to communicate and execute tactical consultation and engagement initiatives. So just a bit of housekeeping, we will have a question and answer session for all presentations at the end of the session. So please use the Q&A function in Teams to submit your questions, and you can also upvote any questions you'd like asked. If we don't have time to get to all the questions, we will come back to the questions following the webinar with a response. And with that, I'll hand over to Paul to talk through his insights into rural speed management. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Matt. Before I share some practical approaches to speed management in a rural context, I believe it's important to start off with the big picture view of speed and the role of speed management in reducing road trauma. The Australian National Road Safety Strategy sets the direction for road safety in Australia. It recognises the criticality and interwoven role of speed management in delivering the vision of zero road deaths and serious injuries by 2050, with speed management embedded across the three themes of safe roads, safe vehicles, and safe road use. Several principles guide the strategy that are listed there, and today I'd like to focus on three of these principles, namely the safe system approach, the evidence-based approach, and the 10-year targets. Let's start with the safe system approach, which underpins the way we approach road safety in Australia. As a reminder, the principles of the safe system approach are that people make mistakes that lead to crashes. The human body has limited physical ability to withstand crash forces before harm occurs. A shared responsibility exists amongst those who plan, design, build, and use roads and vehicles, and all parts of the system must be strengthened to multiply their effects. Speed is at the core of a safe road system, as it influences whether a collision occurs, and if it does, the degree of injury sustained by those involved. Therefore, managing speed is an integral part of the safe system approach to road safety. And because speed is at the core of the safe system, this means that a safe system cannot be delivered without the effective management of speed, and all activities across the safe system pillars must work in unison towards achieving safe speeds. The second principle I'd like to touch on is the evidence-based approach. And the evidence base for speed management is overwhelming. Let's start by reminding everyone of the factors that speed influences. So a vehicle's speed influences several aspects, including a driver's field of vision, their reaction distance, the ability to control and maneuver a vehicle, the stopping distance, and kinetic energy transfer. And to achieve a safe system, vehicle speeds must be below critical thresholds to avoid death and serious injury outcomes for all road users present in the road environment. Many of you will be familiar with these S-shaped curves that demonstrate how survivability changes as a function of the crash type and the collision speed. The curves show that above the 10% survivability threshold, the fatality rate increases very rapidly with small increases in collision speeds for the various crash types. We can use the evidence that a small change in operating speed can have a very large influence on the probability of death and serious injuries to set safe speeds. This chart shows the distance travelled by a vehicle based on the same reaction time in seconds on a wet road. Now, I've produced a little animation that helps to show why small changes in travel speed can produce dramatic changes in consequence. So let's imagine that you're travelling along a rural road, it's raining, and a kangaroo hops out of nowhere 100 metres in front of you. Now, if you're travelling at 70 kilometres an hour, then chances are you'll be able to stop safely and avoid a collision. But if you're travelling at 90 kilometres an hour, the story's quite different, and chances are your vehicle will still be travelling around 50 or 60 kilometres per hour when you reach the kangaroo. And if your initial speed is 110 kilometres per hour, then the collision point will likely be around a speed of around 90 kilometres per hour. This image shows the outcome of crash simulations into fixed objects at 100 kilometres an hour and 60 kilometres per hour. Now, crashing into a kangaroo isn't the same, but equally, as a result of your braking and avoidance actions, especially on a wet road, you could easily lose control of your vehicle and collide with a fixed object, such as a large tree, that might produce an outcome similar to this. Now, we have many instances of successful speed management implementations in Australia and New Zealand, and the example I'd like to share with you now is for a 120 kilometre section of state highway at the top of the South Island in New Zealand. A range of speed limit changes were introduced in December 2020 that replaced the default limit of 100 kilometres per hour. And the new speed limits included the use of 90, 80, and even sections of 60 on parts of the corridor with a particularly tortuous alignment. And in the previous 5 years, there had been 52 deaths and serious injuries on that corridor. Travel speeds were recorded along the corridor before and following implementation of the speed limit changes. And as you can see, average speeds were already well below the default limit of 100 kilometres an hour prior to the change. The speed limit changes had the effect of reducing the 85th percentile speeds most and the 15th percentile speeds the least. This is quite common with speed limit changes in rural areas. It basically means that following a speed limit change, the travel speed variance is less than before the change. Median travel speeds reduced by approximately 3 kilometres per hour from 79 kilometres per hour to 76 kilometres per hour. And for the 120 kilometre journey that would normally take around an hour and a half, that equates to an average travel time increase of only 3 or 4 minutes. Yet that small change in travel time resulted in a 66% reduction in deaths and serious injuries as recorded in the 4-year period following the changes. Now, I'll come back to this example later in the presentation. The third principle I wanted to touch on was that of the 10-year targets. And the National Road Safety Strategy includes targets for 2030 that include reducing fatalities by 50%, reducing serious injuries by 30%, and reducing the rate of these outcomes on a per capita basis. So how is Australia tracking? Well, I think most of you will be aware that the answer to that question is that trauma is tracking in the opposite direction of where we want to be. Based on road deaths up to July this year, it's almost certain that more people will die on Australian roads in 2025 than last year. And based on monthly trends, I would anticipate this will be around 1,380 lives lost, around 90 more than last year. Excuse me. And on a fatality rate basis per population, the trend is the same. Unfortunately, it looks like Australia's fatality rate may exceed 5 for the first time in several years. So that's the context. Now I'll step you through some practical approaches to speed management in a rural context. Before embarking on any speed management interventions, it's important to understand key speed zoning principles. The World Bank's Guide for Safe Speeds sets out 4 key principles for selecting safe speed limits, and they're shown there. Now, through our work with multiple jurisdictions across Australia, we've found that most actually have speed zoning policies that share common speed zoning principles with the Safe Speeds Guide. And these can be summarised as minimising harm based on the safe system approach, setting speed limits based on road function using a movement in place approach, matching speed limits with road design features to enhance credibility and compliance, and maximising well-being by setting speed limits that promote transport choice. So what do these principles mean in practice? Well, it means that speed limits should be set on the basis that people make mistakes and that the human body has limited physical ability to withstand forces before harm occurs. It also means higher speed should be reserved for roads with the highest movement function and vice versa, and that speed limit changes should be implemented in a coherent manner. In a rural context, the principle of maximising well-being by setting speed limits that promote transport mode choice has less relevance, and that's mainly applicable in urban environments, and we'll cover that off in our webinar that's coming up in a couple of weeks' time, where we talk about urban environment. Setting speed limits based on the safe system approach in a rural environment means setting speeds that reflect the level of safety provided by the road design and infrastructure that is present. This means that for roads with the highest speeds, we must include features that eliminate the possibility of head-on impact and provide infrastructure that minimises the transfer of kinetic energy from side-on impacts at intersections or impacts with significant roadside objects to within survivable thresholds. Where the design and infrastructure does not meet these criteria, then we must contemplate reducing speeds to enhance safety outcomes. This slide shows a range of rural road environments. Moving from left to right, we have roads with excellent or good design and infrastructure features, whereas those on the right tend to have none or very few safety features at all. Unfortunately, each of these roads has a common speed limit. Now, surely that shouldn't be the case. And how does that level of inconsistency help build confidence with the public? It certainly works against the principle of matching speed limits with road design features to enhance credibility and compliance. I'm sure that many of you will have a growing awareness and understanding of what star ratings are. Now, this next series of images provides a demonstration of how both speed and infrastructure impact star ratings. And I think it's important that we gain an understanding about that. So here we have a typical rural road with a speed limit of 100 kilometres per hour and a curvilinear alignment. The road has line marking but minimal shoulder, and the nature of the roadside environment is unforgiving. At 100 kilometres an hour, the road has a star rating of 2.7 stars, which is a 2-star road. Now, if the speed limit was reduced to 80 kilometres an hour, then we could immediately improve the star rating from a 2-star road to a 3-star road. It goes up to about 3.2, assuming a modest decrease in average travel speeds. Now, if the speed limit was retained at 100 kilometres per hour, but the shoulder was widened to enable the installation of continuous roadside barrier, then the star rating could be increased to around 3.8 stars. And with the same infrastructure in place at 90, that might improve marginally to 3.9 stars, and then around to 4.2 stars at 80 kilometres per hour. Now, the purpose of sharing these images is to help raise awareness that both speed and infrastructure play a role in star ratings, and when delivered together, they can really magnify the safety benefits. I want to come back to the example I shared earlier from New Zealand, where the speed limit was reduced from the default 100 limit to a combination of 90, 80 and 60 in the rural sections. The image shows, this image here shows the speed limits present in the highlighted section following the changes. Now, the one thing that stands out to me is the retention of the 100 kilometres per hour default limits on most of the roads that intersect the main corridor. So that's all those roads in the light blue. So this means that we have a main road which has got a decent sealed shoulder and speed limits of less than 100 kilometres per hour, but side roads that are designed to a lesser standard that retain high default speed limits. So despite the clear safety benefits that were generated from the change implemented along the main corridor, it's my opinion that the implementation of speed limit changes amplified inconsistencies at a network level and contributed to public pushback, which ultimately led to a political decision to reverse speed limit changes when we had a change in government. However, it's important to note that not all reversals were required and were not required for all roads that had had a speed limit change. On another state highway in New Zealand, sections like this, where the speed limit was lowered from 100 to 80, were reversed, but further along the same corridor, when the road gets into a hilly and winding alignment, the reduced speed limit of 60 kilometres per hour from 100 has been retained. Both examples help reinforce the importance of two key speed zoning principles, that is, setting speed limits based on road function using a movement in place approach, and matching speed limits with road design features to enhance credibility and compliance. Now, whilst we should be advocating and moving towards speed limits that are aligned with safe system principles, this should not be the sole focus of our speed management practices. Remember that any movement in operating speeds towards a safe system speed can deliver significant safety benefits, as this chart helpfully illustrates. It's important to note that I'm not advocating for setting speed limits based on how people currently drive, rather that a strategic approach is needed so that when changes are planned and implemented, they're done so in a manner that reinforces the function of roads within the network and retains as much credibility with the public as possible. A great example of where this has been delivered successfully is in the Mornington Peninsula Shire in Victoria. Here, the council reduced speed limits on high-risk rural roads and implemented a rigorous monitoring and evaluation program to understand the impacts of these changes. We were fortunate to be involved in that evaluation, and this chart provides an example of the change in operating speeds observed on one road subject to a speed zone change. You can see that there was both a reduction in the average free flow speed, but also a condensing of the distribution of speeds, both of which contribute to safer outcomes. So to conclude my part of the presentation, I want to leave you with 4 key messages, and that is speed management is critical for reducing road trauma. Adopt a system-wide approach to speed zoning. Remember that even small changes can really have significant impacts on road trauma. And if we implement our changes in a coherent manner, then we have a much greater chance of success of long-term implementation of speed management across our networks. I'll now hand back to Matt, who will introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for the presentation there, and over to Chris Blackmore for his presentation on data-driven planning.
That's great. Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Paul. So today I'm talking about data-driven planning, specifically about the importance of operating data, moving from lagging indicators to leading indicators, and some summaries of recent speed zoning analysis. So in terms of what questions we're trying to answer, we look at operational data. And operational data is essential to understand how roads are currently used and to support both technical analysis and narrative development. It can help debunk myths, for example, exaggerated travel delays, highlight safety and economic benefits, and build community trust. Data-driven insights provide confidence in decision-making and support stakeholder engagement. Kath will be speaking further on these points in the consultation and engagement discussion. Operational data is vital for assessing current road use and forecasting the impacts of speed limit changes. Without it, speed zoning may lack credibility. Key question is, how can you confidently propose speed limit changes if you don't understand how the road is currently being used? Key operational data covers historic crash records, which are generally well available. Operating speed information. Generally reliable data sets exist for the urban environment. However, it can be tricky in the rural context. There's no national view or single aligned data set, and connected vehicle products need to be applied with caution and with an appreciation of the local area sample rates. And finally, traffic volumes. These are generally not well understood, especially for local roads, and there's no commonly available data that a practitioner can pick up and apply to an analysis. It's important to note that while traffic volumes are not typically used to set speed limits, they influence crash risk in rural areas. The Austroads Infrastructure Risk Rating Manual notes that crash risk increases with traffic volume, especially on undivided rural roads. Operating speed data is central to speed zoning. It helps understand current travel speeds, establish baselines for evaluating changes, forecast travel time and safety impacts, and determine if supporting infrastructure is needed. ABLI have been engaging with stakeholders as part of our contribution to the Austroads Guidance on Speed Management update. This report is currently at the draft report stage. The main points from the literature review echo the evidence that Paul's discussed in terms of safety benefits. Benefits of speed management include reduced fuel use, reduced noise, improved public health, and improved mode shift, especially near rural settlements and along freight corridors. Travel time impacts are often minor, and data can help proactively counter public misconceptions around significant delays. Key point around national consistency was echoed from the Office of Road Safety report. A barrier for Australian reporting on these indicators appears to be the lack of nationally consistent data. Only 1 of 4 indicators can be reported on due to definitional and data collection methodology issues. The New South Wales Speed Zoning Review recommended improving access to operational data, including operational speeds, road user volumes, movement and place classifications, and crash data. With Transport for New South Wales, ABLI have developed a New South Wales-wide operating speed map, which utilises TomTom data. This tool can continue to be developed to integrate with other data sets, and in the future could also potentially include modelled traffic volumes. This would go a long way to creating a single source of truth for practitioners to use in their work. In terms of developing the analysis structure, there are 3 key questions to guide data scoping and collection. Is what analysis needs to be undertaken to support decision making, what data is needed for monitoring, and what data do I have already available. The requirements for supporting analysis may change depending on the jurisdiction you're acting within, the scale of the proposed changes, even down to the level of known focus topics or pain points for elected officials. You should also consider requirements for communication. It's easier and more efficient to be proactive rather than reactive when engaging with stakeholders. The second consideration is what data do I need to access to be able to undertake effective follow-up analyses as part of a structured monitoring program. We'll talk about leading and lagging indicators shortly. The main point at this stage is to make sure the data collected before changes are implemented does not leave gaps which are difficult or impossible to cover retroactively. Finally, what data is readily available? Once these questions are addressed, the subsequent data collection requirements should be relatively clear. Many jurisdictions may already have access to some form of vehicle data in the form of a regular monitoring program. However, additional data collection will almost certainly be required. A relatively recent development in terms of wide spatial coverage datasets are connected vehicle products, such as those provided by Compass IoT, HERE, or TomTom. These are very powerful in terms of the coverage which can be obtained, with rapidly increasing sample rates, especially around urban areas. These do need to be applied with caution in the rural context, as sample sizes do tend to drastically reduce outside of highways and key freight routes. At ABLI, we do frequently scope, recommend, and use these data sets for speed zoning analysis, but this needs to be done with an appreciation of the sampling limitations. In terms of safety performance indicators, traditionally evaluations have relied on lagging indicators. For example, direct comparisons of crash records, which can take years to show results. A shift towards leading indicators, for example, observed changes in operating speeds, allows an earlier detection and measurement of behavioural changes on our roads. This then enables timely interventions like increased enforcement or infrastructure upgrades if sufficient change is not being realised. As I mentioned earlier, understanding current and future operating speeds is essential to estimate travel time changes, quantify safety benefits, and communicate effectively with stakeholders. The screenshot on the right is an example from the existing operating speed data viewer that was created for Transport for New South Wales based on the TomTom operational speed data set. Once existing operating speeds are known, high-level relationships are developed to provide guidance on how future operating speeds are expected to change as a function of the change in speed limit. These can be estimated roughly using just speed limit information, but as Paul noted earlier, the main issue with speed limits on the rural network is that widely varying road contexts are often given the same blanket speed limit. Detailed operating speed data offers direct insight into how the roads are currently being used, helping to refine the impact estimates. Once current and future operating speeds have been analysed, models can be used to estimate the change in safety benefits. The Global Road Safety Facility, managed by the World Bank Group, have developed a speed impact tool based on the ELVIC exponential model. The tool can be downloaded from the Speed Management Hub on the Global Road Safety Facility's website. We have a demonstration output on the right-hand side here, and this is a summary of the example discussed by Paul. So reducing the 85th percentile speeds from 88 kilometres an hour to 81 kilometres an hour on the New Zealand State Highway 6 route is estimated to reduce fatalities by 43% and serious injuries by 34%. This echoes the point made by Paul that small changes in travel speed can have a very large change in the probability of death or serious injury. And now a quick overview of some of the leading indicator before and after studies undertaken in Australia and New Zealand. As Paul mentioned, ABLE were involved in a series of before and after studies for the Mornington Peninsula Shire, specifically looking at speed changes at 20 treated sites and 17 control sites. Over 3 after-period surveys, significant operating speed reductions were observed at the treated sites, around 6 kilometres an hour on average, or around 3 to 4 kilometres an hour when accounting for changes at the control sites. I apologise for the small size of the table, but hopefully we'll get the point across. On the left, speed changes observed in the After 3 study estimate an FSI reduction of around 20% over 5 years. Matching this to a 2-year before and after study looking directly at crash counts shows a control-corrected 20% reduction. This lagging indicator, that is the observed crash rate change, aligns well with the leading indicator estimates, which were observed speed changes. A 5-year follow-up was recommended to confirm the long-term impacts. In the New Zealand context, there have been many speed limit changes through the years. We've been through several periods of speed limit reviews, which range from rural default speed limit reviews in the 1970s through to structured urban and rural speed limit reviews undertaken by local authorities between the 2010s and until recently. This infographic was compiled by Glenn Curry of Via Strada, and it shows consistent reductions in FSIs across both urban and rural networks following speed limit changes. It's also worth noting that all of these numbers have been baselined to a 5-year before and after period for comparable control sites. In summary, of the 3 key operational data components, only crash history is generally well understood recorded, and available. The lack of nationally consistent data impacts analysis both in terms of vehicle speeds and traffic volumes. Connected vehicle datasets can help to fill these gaps, but need to be applied with caution due to low sample rates in some rural areas. It's also worth keeping in mind that data analysis needs to provide insight into technical issues. There is a lot of benefit to be found in proactively incorporating communication and engagement requirements into the scoping of required data analysis. And with that segue, I'll hand back to Matt to move on to the next section.
Thank you, Chris. That's an awesome presentation, thanks. Now over to Kath Jacobs to talk through her presentation on strategic communication and engagement. Thanks, Kath.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Before diving into some tips on how to communicate and engage effectively on speed programs, I just want to flag a couple of quick things. For councils in Australia, the approaches I'll be talking about today may only be applicable when there is backing from the relevant authority or jurisdiction responsible for setting speed limits. The examples used in this presentation are from New Zealand, where we have a different approach to setting the speed limits, where technically local government can set their own speed limits. However, the messaging and engagement tactics still apply in the Australian context. When council receives support from the responsible approval authority or are planning speed changes, it is beneficial to establish alignment based on what the program is looking to achieve or what the regulation allows. In essence, to determine the purpose of the engagement, the role of the public, and the intended outcomes. Clarity is needed on whether the engagement requires consultation, where the public is an active contributor and community input is sought prior to decision making, or whether the public is positioned as an informed recipient with updates provided on progress or decisions without soliciting input beforehand. This distinction shapes the overall engagement strategy, influencing tone, voice, message structure, and the call to action. It also assists in managing expectations among elected officials and leaders by clearly articulating the objectives from the outset. Although the term consultation is commonly used to describe public engagement, it may not always reflect the actual intent or be necessary in every context. Whether regulation allows it, an informed approach in contrast to consultation can be an effective method and has already been adopted by a couple of jurisdictions. This avoids damaging credibility by consulting, then moving ahead for safety reasons, even if the majority of the public are in opposition. So to support the shift in public perception and understanding of safe speed limits, a strategic and an overarching communications and engagement approach is ideal. This begins with clearly defining the rationale behind the change and identifying the target audience, those who will be part of the journey and receiving the narrative. To frame the change effectively, begin by clearly outlining the rationale behind the change, what is driving it, what benefits are expected, and what risks may arise. Establish the broader impacts on communities, systems, and outcomes, not just the technical deliverables or project milestones. This framing is essential regardless of whether the engagement strategy sets out to inform or consult, as it sets the tone for meaningful communication. By being upfront and transparent, this approach helps to build trust with the public and ensures that expectations are aligned from the outset. Next slide, please. When considering messaging tactics, it's worth stepping back and thinking about the bigger picture. What really matters to the people we're engaging with? Essentially, it's about developing a narrative that resonates. When it comes to speed programs, the story told should reflect the values that communities care about most. Things like feeling safe, getting places on time, and trusting that decisions are being made for the right reasons. To support this approach, and as Chris mentioned earlier, using solid evidence-based messaging to show the real impact of speed limits can be impactful. Not just the technical stuff, but how it affects everyday life, like reducing FSIs or how long it takes to get from A to B as a result of a speed change. Once new speed limits are in place, it's also important to measure the results and share them quickly. This helps build credibility, clears up any misconceptions, and shows people that the changes are actually working. And of course, not everyone sees things the same way, and the messaging needs to be tailored. What matters to a local business owner might be totally different from what matters to a parent or a transport planner. The key is to connect the facts to the values, so the story makes sense not just logically, but emotionally and socially too. Here is an example of some recent work done with the Far North District Council in New Zealand, where we supported their speed management consultation process. The approach focused on building a narrative that connected directly to community values, particularly around safety for all road users. Messaging was grounded in evidence-based data, evidence-based narrative, using data from the past 5 years to highlight the number of FSIs in the region. This helped make the issue real and relevant for the community. Importantly, the communications also laid out what the problem is, what's changing, why the change is needed, and what success looks like. By combining data with a values-driven story, the messaging helped build understanding, trust, and support for the proposed changes. Here's a further example from this work where we use data to shape evidence-based messaging. One of the key challenges was addressing the common myth that reducing speed limits would significantly increase travel times. We tackled this by connecting the messaging to everyday values, like getting to places on time, while also emphasising safety. The council had proposed speed reductions across both rural and urban roads. To provide evidence-based data, the ABLE modelling team conducted a detailed analysis to quantify the impact of reduced speeds on travel times and the savings associated with DSIs or FSIs in the Australian context. Using this analysis, our team crafted evidence-based messages for public consumption. These messages help to debunk misconceptions around travel delays, highlight the safety and economic benefits, build trust and support among the community, and they also provided elected officials with confidence in the process. When it comes to implementing engagement tactics for speed programs, technical solutions alone are not enough. Success of engaging hinges on how the people being impacted by the change are being engaged with. Here are some tips and engagement tactics that can help turn good intentions into lasting impact. Early conversations with key stakeholders like schools and community leaders can help shape goals and expectations. It can also surface risk and concerns before they escalate. And by taking this proactive approach, avoids last-minute surprises and builds readiness across the board. Success starts with trusted voices, and who fronts the change matters. By onboarding champions from emergency services, community leaders to elected officials, this helps to build credibility and drives public confidence. Using layered communication channels can help to reach diverse audiences by blending traditional and digital methods, from flyers and letters to emails and interactive maps. It is also key to prioritise accessibility and the use of plain language. Not everyone engages the same way, so meeting people where they are, whether that's online through a targeted webinar for a technical audience or at a community hall for the public, engagement tactics used should be relevant, inclusive, and accessible. Cultural and community partnerships is about being intentional with who we work with and how we show up. Tips include partnering with local influencers and respected community leaders, the people who already have trust and credibility in the community, as they are the ones who can help carry the message in a way that resonates. It is also key to honour local protocols in any interaction, such as formal welcomes, cultural customs, or simply knowing who to speak to first. Engagement isn't just about asking for input, it's about showing people that their voices matter, and building feedback loops and trust signals into the process support this. Key approaches include showing how public input shaped decisions. You said, we did. Publishing engagement summaries, acknowledging different views and explaining final decisions, and post-project updates to help maintain support and future-proof against backlash. Returning to the Far North District Council example, here are some of the tactics the council used to inform and consult with the community. Social Pinpoint was used as the online platform to provide stakeholders and community members with a visual map highlighting where proposed speed limit changes might occur. This tool helped the public understand how these changes could affect their daily travel. It also allowed the council to collect online feedback in one central location and identify common trends and themes, essentially providing a holistic understanding of what matters most to the community. Public feedback was documented in the Public Engagement Report and published. The report provided an overview of the proposed changes, the speed management plan, engagement activities undertaken, community feedback and themes by area and areas of interest, and it also outlined the next steps. The report essentially played back to the community what they told council and what council heard, and how their input will be used to shape decisions. A post-engagement report was also developed for elected officials. In addition to community feedback, the report included strategic analysis, economic analysis, impact analysis on deaths and serious injuries and travel times, and regional strategic alignment considerations. The report provided elected officials with transparent information, helping to build confidence in the public engagement process and supported informed decision-making. So, in summary, key considerations when implementing a speed program. Investment in comms. The level of investment in comms to support speed limit changes should match the degree of public interest and concern. Implementing a comms strategy at the right time can help to boost public confidence and lay a foundation for buy-in. This process can also empower elected officials and leaders to confidently support speed changes. When councils are planning a speed program, it is recommended to develop a comprehensive comms and engagement strategy, taking a multi-staged approach. Start early, reach out to key groups like schools, community members, as those are the people who will feel the change most directly. So it's important that they're part of the conversation from the beginning. Think about onboarding local champions, those trusted voices in the community who can help represent the change. Use a mix of digital and face-to-face channels and meet people where they are. Keep your messaging transparent and consistent. Link messaging and narrative to evidence-based community values, and be clear about what the engagement is for and how feedback will be used. People want to know their input matters. And finally, build trust proactively. Be upfront about the expected impacts of the proposed changes and keep both the public and elected members informed every step of the way. That clarity and openness goes a long way in building support and preventing future backlash. Last but not least, managing expectations with leaders is a key consideration to build into planning. Expect pushback. It's just part of the process. Change makes people uncomfortable, and early resistance doesn't necessarily mean long-term opposition. Attitude shift is sometimes faster than we think. Councils need to set realistic expectations with leaders and change agents. Let them know that initial resistance is normal, it's temporary, and if they're prepared for it, they'll be more confident and resilient when the criticism starts rolling in. Something we see again and again, the same concerns pop up anywhere, whether it's a small council in New Zealand or a state organisation in Australia. The objectives tend to follow the same pattern, and they're often based on misinformation. Councils can anticipate these concerns and respond proactively. Finally, trust the data. Practitioners consistently observe that public resistance does fade once speed limit changes are actually implemented. International studies back this. Once people experience the change, acceptance will grow. Thanks very much, everyone, and back to you, Matt.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Kath, Chris and Paul, for your incredibly informative presentations. So we do have 10 minutes left of this session, so let's open up the floor for some questions on what has been presented today. And I am going off the Q&A, and I am using the most upvoted questions first. So let's go first to Graham's question, which is, what are some SPIs that ABLE would recommend to use in a rural speed management context?
Yeah, I can help with that one, and I've shared an answer with to Graham's question in the chat there. Look, there's a range of different safety performance indicators that you could develop. The key things with safety performance indicators, one of the key things to remember with those is that establish a safety performance indicator so that as you make changes, the safety performance indicator improves. So the example I've provided is the proportion of vehicle kilometres travelled, or it could be road network length on undivided rural roads that have a speed limit less than 100 kilometres per hour. Now you could set that to be less than or equal to 80 kilometres per hour if you want. But the way that's worded means that you can influence that safety performance indicator in about 3 different ways. First of all, you could reduce the speed limit, so that will improve the safety performance indicator. The second one is you could convert an undivided road to a divided road using median barrier, and that would be mainly relevant for state roads that have got a significant movement function and carry moderate to high levels of volume. And then the third way could be to encourage greater use of roads that are built to a higher standard, so moving traffic from undivided roads to divided roads. That would help further support the national target of 80% or more VKT on 3-star or better roads. When we respond to everyone, I'll provide some other SPI examples in that space, but that's a pretty good starting point on that one there.
Great answer, Paul. Anything from you, Chris or Kath, on that? No? Awesome.
No,
All right.
nothing else, Sean. Thanks.
Let's move on to a question from Brett. So to help with engagement, is anyone aware of a method to estimate the economic benefits of reduced trauma and disruption associated with implementing appropriate speed limits? This could be contrasted against the typical arguments around increased travel times.
Look, yeah, that's a great question, Brett. I am aware of a presentation and a peer-reviewed, I'm just reading it now, a fully peer-reviewed report that Ping Sim of Auckland Transport recently shared that was based on research undertaken on the network disruption cost of serious crashes in Auckland. So what I will do is I will share that LinkedIn link with everyone as part of the response here, but I think that that's really useful because we're often having conversations about, well, it takes someone an extra 2 minutes to get here and 3 minutes to get here. But when we have when we have an incident, particularly on a major movement corridor, we often end up with massive delays to everyone. And if we can avoid those, then there must be significant economic benefits associated with reduced trauma. Now, interestingly, on a lot of those motorway networks, when we're in managed motorway situations, they often have speed limits less than 100 kilometres per hour as well, which, when you consider the safety features that are built into those roads, doesn't make sense for roads without those safety features to be left at 100 or even 110, depending on which part of the country you're in.
Great stuff, Paul. Chris, Kath, were you going to say anything on that?
Just in terms of the economics, there was some really good work done by, I think it was Max Cameron, across New Zealand and Australia. I'll see if I can grab the reference to that and add it to the chat as well. My key takeaway for that is when you're talking about economics, it's really important to balance all of the economic benefits against the travel time change. Regulations and appraisal procedures in New Zealand and Australia generally focus on using the value of statistical life, which is a surveyed value that people would potentially pay to avoid injury or death. It's generally not a derived value on what the actual costs are in terms of network productivity, congestion, all of the wider benefits, which can be significant, especially when you consider a really serious crash could close a key route for multiple hours or days. So, yeah, again, my overall advice would be to make sure you are comparing and contrasting things equally and including all of those wider costs as well.
Great addition, Chris. No, thanks, guys. It's really good answers. And I think we probably have time for one more question. So we've got Ross's question is, are you able to advise on how evidence-based messages are received by the community? Maybe to you, Kath.
I think from the example used in the presentation, so some of the typical myths are around increasing speed reductions will increase travel time. So we were proactive working with the council to make sure that to implement those messages, which in the long run sort of quieten the noise coming from the community. It also gave elected officials sort of the confidence as they weren't getting such backlash from the community, and we were able to tell that story using the economic benefits, but translate into plain language to tell that story to the community and how less of an impact speed reductions would have in their daily lives. Hopefully that answers your question.
A great response. Paul, Chris, anything to add on that one? Nope.
No, look, Kat's the expert in that space, but I think it's really useful to share in as much information as you can as possible with the community about how people currently travel on roads and what the expectations will be in terms of additional travel time. There's often a lot of deviation between what people think the impacts will be on them and then what they will be in reality. And as Kath said, over time, change becomes accepted more widely.
Thanks, Paul. All right, just looking at the time, I think that's probably all the time we'll have for questions today. So I might just wrap it up now. So thank you very much again for joining us. We have recorded today's session and that will be circulated tomorrow in addition to a short survey to understand whether you've enjoyed the webinar and to gather ideas for future webinars as well. So please take the time to give us your feedback. The slide pack is also available on request, so please reach out to one of the presenters if you'd like this. And additionally, we will be hosting another webinar on the 9th of September on tackling urban road safety in Australia. So if you haven't already registered or have any colleagues who may be interested, you can sign up and share the invite using the QR code shown on the screen. And finally, to those of you who are attending the Australasian Road Safety Conference in Perth, ABLI are proud to be gold sponsors of the conference, and many of the presenters today will be in attendance, and we can't wait to see you there. Thank you very much for your time today, and we'll leave it there. Thanks all.